Fury over the death of 10-year-old Sarah Sharif. She was found dead in August last year at her home in Woking after weeks of abuse. Her father and stepmother have today been found guilty of her murder. Commissioner Rachel D'Souza told Tonight with Andrew Marr that the little girl was known to social services before she was born.
That means she would be 6 times more likely than normal children to die due to abuse, neglect, inflicted injuries than other children. She has been let down, and I am not accepting any more from anyone. Lessons will be learned, or we're doing a review. I need change. I need change for these children now.
Police are investigating dozens of people and their possible involvement in the post office scandal. Hundreds of sub-postmasters were wrongly prosecuted for stealing after faulty Horizon software caused accounting errors. Facebook, Instagram and WhatsApp are experiencing technical issues. Tens of thousands of users have reported problems. Parent company Meta says it's working on the issue. And FIFA's confirmed Saudi Arabia as a host of the 2034 World Cup. There have been complaints from lawyers and charities over the country's human rights record. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 21 points at 83.02. The pound buys $1.28 and €1.21. LBC weather mostly cloudy across England and Wales tonight. Clear spells and a frost in the north and a low of -3. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8. Welcome to the programme. It's Wednesday's Cross Question. On the panel, we have Will Hutton, political economist, who's a columnist for The Observer and also its former editor. Of course, The Observer is up for sale at the moment. You might want to ask a question on that because, as I've just discovered in the news, Will's got some quite interesting views on it. Gideon is sitting next to him, campaigner, social commentator and former Conservative MP. To my right, Reem Ibrahim, communications manager for the Institute of Economic Affairs, and next to her, Mike Tapp, the Labour MP for Dover and Deal. The number to call, 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number too and text 84850 and watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's go to our first caller. It's Lynn in Sidcup. Hello, Lynn.
Hello, Iain. How are you?
I'm terribly well, Lynn. What would you like to ask?
I would like to ask, why are prisons, if we had prisons that were tougher, surely we would not have so many reoffenders. Now, prisons, as far as I'm aware, are really little holiday camps.
Oh,
so
please.
If they weren't, surely we would not have so many reoffenders.
Now, Lynn, you sound a very nice lady, but have you ever been in a prison, either as a prisoner or to visit somebody in prison?
I have visited someone in prison, yes. However,
Did the prison that you went to strike you as a holiday camp?
No, that's probably exaggeration. However, I feel that if they weren't, I can't explain myself, but I think if they weren't not even as good as they appear to be.
So you think they should be harsher? That's what you're getting at.
I do,
okay.
Absolutely. And maybe wouldn't have so many reoffenders.
Let's put that to our panel. Will Hutton, let's start with you. I mean, there is a certain logic to that argument. If you make prisons the most horrible places possible, people are going to make sure they don't go to them. That's essentially what Lynn is arguing.
Lynn, I don't agree with you. I understand why you say what you say. I mean, we are all worried about street crime. Massive amounts of mobile phones get stolen kind of every day now. But, I mean, Britain's incarceration rate is specifically the highest in Europe. We put more people away than any other country in Europe. And it hasn't really kind of had a commensurate impact on our crime rate. That's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is that, I'm with Winston Churchill, when he was Home Secretary in 1910, he said that you can judge a civilization by how it treats its prisoners and how it regards prison. Is it a place to kind of, throw people into a dungeon and throw away the key, or is it a place where you try to rehabilitate folk? And if you think about rehabilitation, I mean, our prisons are so overcrowded that it's close to impossible. The amount of hours a day that you can spend kind of learning a new skill or kind of dealing with your psychological problems, whatever it is that you've got, are kind of minimal. And the last thing to say is that actually prisons today are incredibly overcrowded. I mean, they're 2 to a cell, 3 to a cell in cells that were only organised for one person. Often a kind of incredible kind of running with rats, water on the walls and damp. You get very ill in them. The idea that a holiday camp is kind of far, far from the truth. Rory Stewart, who was an ex-Tory MP, in his book actually describes his 18 months as prisons minister and actually gives a very graphic account of some of the prisons he visited, which were just ghastly. So, there is a job of work to be done here. We have to think about how we're going to kind of get the crime rate down. We've got to think about how we deter people. But it's not to start with the assumption that today's prisons are a holiday camp, I think is the wrong place to look.
Joe Gideon.
So I think that prisons are for people who we want to keep out of society, so for serious offences. I don't think they're the right place for, shall I say, minor offences, but we do need to have alternatives, so the public need to feel that people are sufficiently punished for whatever crime. I remember I did some work with a veteran charity, and I found that at that point about a quarter of the prison population were ex-veterans, and I think there is something around reoffending and being institutionalised, that people who come out and don't have a viable alternative when they come out, and we know that people often come out with very little cash and very little opportunity to turn their lives around. The only place that they know that they will have 3 square meals a day is prison.
Yeah.
So we need to address these things.
But what about the prison conditions themselves? Should they be harsher than they are?
Well, I mean, I did go into a prison in the Isle of Sheppey as a visitor. It was not a pleasant experience, and that was one of the modern prisons. From what I read, prisons are not much fun, and I don't think that making the regimes tougher and even more overcrowded is going to help.
OK. Mike Tapp.
So I have the privilege of sitting on the Justice Select Committee, and a few weeks ago we actually visited the prison in Brixton, and that was not good conditions at all.
That's a really old prison.
It's a Victorian prison, and there's 2 to a cell. The one prisoner is defecating where in the same room that the other is eating. They're a mess. It's falling to pieces. The Isle of Sheppey is a good example of a prison that has low reoffending rates. But I think going back to the good question, it's about balance. It's about ensuring that you are punishing violent and dangerous offenders, keeping them in prison.
But isn't the punishment depriving them of their freedom? I mean, if you're subjecting a human being to inhumane circumstances, that's a double punishment.
And I was going to. My next point was going to be: you don't need inhumane conditions. Of course, it shouldn't go as far as a holiday camp, but not inhumane. What the focus has to be on those that are in prison is rehabilitation, of course, to ensure that when they do come out, that they don't commit the crime again, and whether that's violent crime or fraud or whatever they're in for. And that is going to take a lot of investment and time to get up to scratch, to be quite frank. And one of the big concerns that I have in prisons, having worked for the National Crime Agency, is the drugs getting in through serious.
Did you work for? I didn't know that.
I certainly
What did you used to do?
So I worked in the intelligence side of things before I went on to a counter.
So obviously you can't talk about that at all.
That would be irresponsible of me. But I can tell you that I did work on some prison crime and against some of the gangs that were running drugs in, and they've become very creative.
But that's an exciting job. Why have you gone from that to go into politics?
I can assure you, Ian, this is just as exciting as pursuing dangerous criminals.
OK, Reem, Ibrahim.
Yes, I agree with most of what was said on the panel already. I do think that what Joe picked up on is really important, that actually there probably are too many crimes at the moment that end up resulting in a prison sentence. I don't think, for example, that case of the Conservative councillor's wife, that that tweeted something quite disgusting during the riots, I don't think someone like her should be receiving an 18-month prison sentence for a Twitter post, or an X post, sorry. So I think that fundamentally we probably put too many people in prison as a result of very, very non-violent and, in my view, very, very minor crimes, things that probably shouldn't be a crime at all. I would also argue that some non-violent drug crimes should not result in a prison sentence. We have to find other ways to punish people that are not prisons. And I think that prisons are for removing dangerous people from society that we don't want in society, on our streets, in the public. We have to find other ways to punish people.
I think it's really interesting that on this panel we've got a range of political views from left and right, and yet you're all kind of in the same place on this.
Yeah.
Whereas if we were doing this 30 years ago, we would have had somebody, probably you, Reem, saying, lock them up for life, let's bring back hanging and that sort of thing.
As a libertarian, I definitely do want to bring back hanging. Or
but you know what I mean? There would have been the voice of the authoritarian right, which doesn't seem to exist so much nowadays. Interesting. But let's take a follow-up call from Jerry in St Albans. Jerry, what would you like to say?
Right, I really just want a frank answer, not kind of like, that there's no staff or anything like that. Why isn't there any rehabilitation in prison whatsoever? And I'm talking from experience, not me personally, but my son, okay? There's nothing. And then when they come out and they go to an approved premises, there's still nothing.
It's not joined up, is it?
There's no English, there's no maths.
All right, well, let's go to our panel. Member of the Justice Select Committee, Mike Tapp. Why? I mean, Jerry says there's no rehabilitation. Obviously, an exaggeration. Some prisons will be better than others, but she's got a broadly correct point, hasn't she?
There is some rehabilitation, and I agree that it certainly needs to improve. And look, there's been schemes in Isle of Sheppey, for example, that links up with the college, East Kent College, and ensuring that those that are due for release are upskilling, be it in normal trades or carpentry, building, but also in other prisons they're looking at more creative arts, which is really interesting because it gives people a passion and something to leave and pursue. But the fact is, we have inherited an absolute mess, an underfunded prison service with no spaces left. So we need to get the basics right first and make sure that there's space for criminals to go into, and that's why we've committed to building 4 new prisons by 2031 with 14,000
That was done under the previous government, of course. There was nothing new in what Shabana Mahmood was saying today. There's no extra prisons.
Well, you can judge us on our delivery, and the Conservatives have failed to deliver on these things, and we'll be working hard to do that. And look, what we inherited during the summer riots was simply unacceptable. The fact that we've been forced on early release should never happen again, and we do have answers to that, and there will be much more to come in terms of improving the rehabilitation system too, because it is really important. I agree with Jerry.
Reem, isn't the part of the key here, if you're going to rehabilitate someone, it's probably a good idea if they can read and write first, isn't it? I mean, that really is getting back to basics.
That is definitely the basics. It is what I want. I will say I don't think that everybody can be rehabilitated. There definitely are some very, very violent criminals or some people that genuinely cannot be rehabilitated. The problem that we have at the moment is, I mean, I think that Mike's absolutely right. The situation that we're in, where effectively in the summer we had about 100 spaces left, so very, very near complete overcapacity. We should never have been in that position in the first place. I don't necessarily think it's underfunding. I think it's a political problem. It's the fact that nobody wants new prisons being built in their constituencies. No member of parliament wants to go to their constituents and say, we are going to have a big prison right next to your home. Nobody wants that. So we have to have an understanding about where it's going to happen, maybe in more rural communities. Maybe we're going to actually build those areas in those constituencies. And I will say, the Labour government have said that they're going to try and relax some of the regulatory rules around where they can build prisons so that they can have sort of automated approval processes, so it's much easier to build. We absolutely need to build, I mean, not just prisons, houses. We don't build anything in this country, and I think that is a huge, huge problem economically and, of course, for prisons. But fundamentally, this also brings back to the point that we just put too many people in prison for too many different types of crime. There is no reason a non-violent criminal needs to go to prison, needs to be removed from society.
It's an interesting point you make about people don't want a prison built near them. Where I live, though, house has been completed on Friday, so I won't live there anymore. But 2 miles down the road, former RAF Coltishall, they turned that into a prison for sex offenders. No, but I mean, I didn't even know that when I moved in. In 10 years there, has that impacted on my life in that area? Not one iota. So I think that there's a lot of
initial perception, isn't it?
Exactly.
You're not going to have sex offenders roaming the streets.
Anyway, going back to rehabilitation, Joe.
Yes, going back to rehabilitation, I think the key thing is, what is the purpose of prison? And if you think it's punishment, then I think that's historically been a sort of, well, why should they have televisions? And, then you don't think that there should be a lot of investment in rehabilitation. I think we've come a long way, and clearly when we're talking about reoffending, if you don't rehabilitate whilst people are in prison, then there is no incentive for them to turn their life around, change, and they haven't got the skills necessarily. So I think it's vital. It is a matter of finance, I think. If prisons are overcrowded, then to find spare staff and spare space to have schemes is difficult. But I think that hopefully with the new prisons that are being built, it will be fundamentally built into the system that rehabilitation is as important as punishment.
Will, you touched on this in your previous answer.
Yeah.
Anything to add?
Well, there's I don't know whether everyone's seen it, but I went to see this film, Sing Sing. Come across that?
I've seen it.
Fantastic movie. It's about a kind of incarceration in kind of Boston or New York or Baltimore. And it's a story about a bunch of inmates and the leadership of them, enabled by a kind of liberalish regime who actually use theatre and and the mounting of a play as a group of prisoners, some of them very violent, actually, violent histories. It's based on a real-life story, and actually, bit by bit by bit, the act of doing this kind of, brings the group together, they learn off each other, and finally begin one by one to get released. It's kind of inspiring, actually. If you haven't seen it, it's really worth seeing it.
Do you remember, though, in about, 2001 or something, Jack Straw was Home Secretary, and it emerged through one of the tabloids that, I think it was in Lewes Prison, they were having courses on theatre and stand-up comedy. And, of course, the tabloid said, what an utter waste of money. This is outrageous. And I thought, what a great idea this is.
Well,
because
actually,
from a prison governor's point of view, you want that sort of thing. So sort of partly to, I suppose, if there is going to be a fight, well, use comedy to stop it.
These were men who were murderers, kind of one on death row, incredible, actually. And it is based on a life story, so it's not, it just demonstrates that actually, if you get the context right, and if you get the leadership right, and if you and the inmates, actually, it's also about converting the inmates to the cause. Yes. I mean, some kind of in prison for violent crime, learning Shakespeare isn't obvious,
Right, we need to go to a break because we've got lots more of your questions to get through. 0345 6060 973. Will is very keen to answer a question on the sale of the Observer. If anyone,
I'm answering.
Maybe nobody cares. I don't know, but they should. It's 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on Global Player. This is LBC.
20 past 8 on LBC. We have Labour MP Mike Tapp, former Conservative MP Joe Gideon, Reem Ibrahim from the IEA, and Will Hutton, ex-editor of The Observer. Get your questions in now. Scott,
you may have to ask the question.
We still haven't had one. I'm determined to get one before the end of the hour. Scott in West Hampstead says, the National Farmers Union chief said today that food shortages cannot be ruled out if the farmers go on strike. Another farmer at today's Westminster protest said on LBC, "Wake up, Starmer, this isn't going to end here today." Are panel members in sympathy with the farmers, or do they think that the government is right to be tough with farmers over the proposed inheritance tax changes? Reem.
So I absolutely am sympathetic towards all of those farmers, especially those that are just above that £1 million threshold. And so they are absolutely going to have to pay that inheritance tax. I mean, I think we've got to talk about inheritance tax and call it what it is. It is absolutely a death tax. It's when you die, you are unable to then pass on your farm to the next generation of farmers. And I think that's absolutely disgraceful.
But why should farmers be treated differently from small business people?
Yes, I don't think they should. And ultimately, this budget, I think, has been one of the worst that we've seen. We've seen huge amounts of money being taken from working people, and farmers are one of them. That being said, I don't think that farmers should be getting an exemption on inheritance tax. I think inheritance tax should be abolished altogether. This particular point is really important.
Why did I know you were going to say that?
Get rid of it altogether. I don't think that farmers are special. I don't think they should be getting an exemption, but I don't think anybody should be paying an additional tax when they die.
Will, explain to us why they should.
I do.
Assuming you believe that.
I take a diametrically opposite view to Ibrahim, actually, yeah. I think we have debated this in the past, haven't we? I can't remember, but anyway. Look, I mean, you call it a death tax, I call it a we share in your good luck tax. The numbers of people in Britain who are going to inherit £1 million or £2 million or £3 million are kind of 0.1, 0.2% of the population. And actually, no one's suggesting that we should kind of confiscate their wealth in a kind of Stalinist raid. We're saying that a proportion of that, and in the case of the farmers, it's you get £1 million of relief, and then it's a 20% kind of tax rate.
A lot of them can't afford that.
Here's my point. No, look, when this principle was kind of really codified, which was brought in by Gladstone in 1881 or 1882, he called it a succession tax. And the idea was, exactly to pick up Ian's point, that actually when, assets and wealth move from one generation to the next, you can go to the Aztecs, the Incas, the Romans, the Greeks, medieval Europe, kind of every country in Europe, as far as I know, say part of that wealth, a sliver, should actually be paid into the common pool, because wealth actually can't be exercised independently of the society of which you are part. That's the principle of inheritance tax. Once you accept the principle, farmers should have to pay it, but there should be exemptions for the proper reason that actually, we need farmers, and actually, having left the European Union and the Common Agricultural Policy, kind of yields in farming are kind of much, much lower. It's kind of much tougher, and I would have loved it if, in the run-up to 2016, the farmers had come out in the streets, and so we really, it's in our interest, and it's in food security interest that we stay inside the Common Agricultural Policy, or if we leave the European Union, we must have a similar policy. That wasn't said, and consequently we are where we are.
Well, I absolutely want to see farmers and British farming be competing with other countries across the world, and I'm very, very pro-free trade. This week we are going to enter the CPTPP, which is undoubtedly going to increase food security domestically in the UK. That being said, I think that the inheritance...
It's 0.01% of our trade, Ibrahim, come on. I mean,
at the moment, but we've not entered the CPTPP yet. Look, I hope it does.
You just said something which is factually incorrect, if I may suggest. You said all other European countries
I think there's one or two.
Sweden, which is
a
a country that people on the left always like to cite as a sort of model of taxation and all the rest of it. They abolished their inheritance tax rate 20 years ago.
I think you'll find that there's gift taxes in Sweden, and there's other kinds of ways in which wealth transfers are taxed while you're living rather at the moment of death. I mean, different countries come to this kind of the trigger moment for the tax is different. So I mean, just kind of
the real issue.
No, let me bring the other panelists in, Reem. Mike.
Yes, it's been a difficult decision for obvious reasons. But firstly, we've got to remember that 12,000 farms closed under the Conservative government, and there was some really difficult trade deals made, the Australia-New Zealand trade deal, which shafted, excuse my language, the farmers and left them in a really difficult position too. Now, the taxes that we've put on, the inheritance tax, is there for those with broader shoulders, and up to £3 million for couples on those estates. And it's the larger estates that will fill that. But at the same time, there's £5 billion worth of investment in sustainable farming. We're also looking at bringing down energy bills for farmers, which is really important because that's gone up significantly under the Conservatives. So there's a lot of help there for farmers too. And things aren't as bad as I think are being made out by some. I think it's been whipped up by some opposition politicians who are cosplaying as farmers, and it's quite ridiculous, some of the sites I saw today, to wind people up.
But what about when John McTernan, who's respected Labour advisor, I'm told does advise Keir Starmer behind the scenes, he said, well, we're only doing to the farmers what Margaret Thatcher did to the miners.
Well, that's certainly not accurate. And
ridiculous. It feels like it to some farmers.
I haven't heard that quote, but it's certainly not accurate. And look, we're also looking at ensuring that public sector are buying British food, and that's going to help the farmers in prisons, we've just spoken about, on army bases and with the NHS as well. So these things are going to help farmers. So look, what I say to small farmers, and by the way, I have some in my constituency, I've met with them, is to talk to your accountants as well, because these aren't easy figures to work out, and then let's have more of a conversation about this, because it is being whipped up, and I think some are.
Do you not fear, and this is a horrible thing to suggest, but I've heard it said that this measure is going to come in from April 2026, that there will be farmers who decide to take their own lives in advance of April 2026 to avoid this. I mean, it's a horrible thing to even contemplate, but you can see it happening.
It's an absolute tragedy to hear that as a possibility. Look, it's difficult to comment on, really. I'd expect that...
But it's got to that level.
If taxes are leading to that, there will be deeper issues, and if anyone's feeling like that, they should be reaching out for help. That's mental health.
Joe Gideon.
I'm absolutely 100% behind the farmers. In my time in Parliament, I chaired the all-party parliamentary group on the National Food Strategy, and I think, to suggest that we can guarantee food security whilst penalising the producers of food in this country is absolutely ridiculous. I heard Keir Starmer's speech to the NFU, and I think it was horrendous how he lied about how Labour would be supportive of farmers. You only have to look
says
at
they are £5 billion. I mean, that's a lot of money.
But it's
10
actually
years
about...
to pay the tax. I mean, I do think it's kind of it's 10 years to pay the tax, interest-free. It's not exactly that.
If I may finish.
Yeah.
So it's actually about the fact that farmers do not feel that the government is on their side.
But farmers never do. My father was a farmer. I mean, did he ever say to me, I like this government, they're on my side? No, he didn't.
Farmers never do. But the issue about land ownership, and I think this is a sort of an ideological thing by the Labour Party, because they hate landowners. And, the suggestion that it's just the terribly rich landowners that they want to stop. It's certainly having a different effect on smaller farmers for whom land is a tool. It's not.
But Joe, the smaller farmers won't be affected. I mean, my grandfather was a farmer, and my family's had to pay inheritance tax. And some of the land that the family had to dispose of is actually now held by small farmers. I mean, it breaks things up. It gets some churn in the countryside. I find the idea that
why are the farmers so annoyed? If everything you say is true, I don't believe the NFU are deliberately stirring it up
because
unnecessarily.
Profitability in farming has sunk, and it's sunk because of the
subsidies.
The new regime outside the common agricultural policy is extraordinarily tough, and actually people should take ownership of the fact that actually, having left the European Union and put nothing reasonable in its place, farming is damn tough. Now, to blame inheritance tax for it is to blame the wrong thing.
No, but we have to.
I think we've got to blame net zero.
We have to make it easier for farmers, not more difficult. And this is just, a lot of farmers have said this is the final nail in the coffin.
But
and
that's
family
a very important
farms that
sentence.
have been.
You said the final nail in the the coffin, you've got to think of all the other nails that have actually gone in, and I want to discuss those as well.
Can I just discuss one of those many nails, which is
not about blame.
Huge swathes of regulation that are absolutely stifling farmers. The fact that in Scotland they're implementing a new piece of legislation that would mean that huge amounts of money has to now be spent on ensuring that they are effectively implementing a net zero strategy on those farms. It is absolutely ridiculous that we are subjecting British farmers to this kind of absolutely absurd regulation. What I will say is net zero is a good aim. It will happen through the private sector and it will happen through technological advancements. We mentioned the fact that farming in this country is so unproductive. Why
it's not unproductive. It is. It's the yields are very. I mean, farmers are pretty bloody good actually. And the trouble is the price they pay, the price they get, the revenues they get are kind of not commensurate with the costs they're paying, and that's the problem.
Part of it is subsidies. I mean, I'm absolutely against farming subsidies. I think that taxpayers should not be footing the bill. And this is maybe the comparison to the Thatcher's miners. The British taxpayer should not be subsidising failing industries. Now, part of the reason why British farming is failing, and I think we mentioned this earlier, energy bills are incredibly high. We know that effectively cancelling
North Sea... I think it's a wrong way of framing this.
When we open up, they cannot compete. They cannot. Of course, British farmers are brilliant, but they cannot compete. Often cannot compete with international competitors.
You're a great champion of that.
Sometimes it seems cheaper to have solar farms on your land than grow food. And I think that there is a real important case to be made for looking at land usage in the UK. If we're going to have enough food, as a food security means growing more, in house, as it were. And if we're going to have enough food,
we should import
energy.
We are self-sufficient in key things like milk, and we are self-sufficient in key grains. Some of the things we're not self-sufficient in, I think, you can't grow here.
We should be self-sufficient. I completely agree with you. I
didn't say self-sufficient.
We should be very pro importing food from other countries that produce it more efficiently. That is the principle of free trade.
And the problem is that farmers now, if you're a wheat farmer, you get roughly the same in cash terms for a ton of wheat now than you did when my father was farming 20 years ago. And I mean that is not sustainable.
And equally,
we have to move on.
It's cheaper for.
Whether you like it or not.
Right.
Yes, I'm hoping we are still going to get a question on the sale of the Observer. Hint, hint. You can text a question in if you like. Do I sound desperate? Yes, I am, because we want to hear Will's views on that. It's 8:32. Let's get the news headlines on LBC with Daryl Jackson.
The Children's Commission has told LBC she's filled with fury over the death of 10-year-old Sarah Sharif, who was found dead at her home in Woking last August. Her father and stepmother have today been found guilty of her murder after weeks of abuse. Sir Keir Starmer's accused the Tories of fearmongering over inheritance tax for farmers as hundreds of tractors lined Whitehall as part of protests. The Prime Minister insists a vast majority will be unaffected by the change. And FBI Director Christopher Wray says he plans to resign at the end of President Joe Biden's term in January. Donald Trump signalled his intent to fire the veteran official and replace him when he becomes president next year. LBC weather mostly cloudy across England and Wales tonight. Clear spells and frost in the north and a low of -3.
This is LBC. Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:34. The questions on the Observer are flooding in now. But isn't it interesting? All the questions tonight are coming from Kent. Alan in Dover says, "Here you go, Iain. What does Will Hutton think about the sale of the Observer?"
Constituent. He's got no questions.
Wesley in Gravesend says the same. So why is this controversial? Why shouldn't the Observer be sold to Tortoise Media?
Well, first of all, it's been under the ownership of the Guardian Media Group for 30 years.
So?
It sits alongside the Guardian as two sister paper, brother paper. They're a joint brand, Guardian Observer. They reinforce each other. It's true that the Observer has been neglected by the owners over the last kind of 5, 6, 7 years, arguably earlier than that, but certainly the last 5, 6, 7 years. Notwithstanding that, it's kind of increased its market share as a Sunday paper. It makes a small profit. It probably breaks even when you take into account its share of the Guardian's cost, which it should share. And it's above all, it's in a newspaper and media landscape which is very dominated by the right. There, you can get on a Sunday, you're not only in the paper but actually online stuff for free because it's widely available. What's going to happen when it's sold is that it will go behind a paywall, and so on one day in the week, an important day in the week, an important kind of contributor to kind of liberal journalism and the national discussion will be quieter. And now that if you're the Scott Trust, and your job is to protect liberal journalism, that's a self-defeating thing to do. But here's the thing. If the new owners make a success of it, which I ardently hope they do, although it will be a kind of smaller setup than the current one, the Guardian will eventually for itself a competitor, because it'll undoubtedly kind of use its brand to kind of have a web presence, Monday to Saturday, and if it goes pear-shaped, we'll have lost a great national asset. So when you look at it editorially in terms of liberal journalism and kind of what makes strategic sense for the Guardian, it's a decision which all the journalists at both all the journalists at the Guardian Observer kind of fiercely oppose.
But you see, isn't this where lefty journalists become conservatives in that you don't like change, you don't like new companies coming in and innovating because you want it to be like it's always been, he said provocatively.
Well, I kind of admire Tortoise Media. I mean, I think that the podcasts are fantastic. There's a wonderful series on Elon Musk at the moment, which is worth listening to. And actually, James Harding is a kind of live wire.
That's enough sucking up to your new boss.
No. I was listening to Elon. I was listening to the podcast on Tortoise Media long before this was mooted. But and it may be a success, and I hope it is a success. You don't want anything to fail, but the way it's going to be a success could have been done under the Guardian's ownership. That's the point.
Brief comments from anyone else?
I don't have strong opinions other than I do hope it's a success going forward.
Well, we can all agree on that. Right, let's go to Chris in Croydon.
Thank you just to express my view. A great question from Kent. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to a great question from Chris in Croydon. Chris, hi.
Oh, good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. Yes, my question is this. As a football fan, should Keir Starmer use his influence to make FIFA accountable?
I know what you're referring
Saudi
to here.
Arabia.
Only 2 days after the Prime Minister visited Saudi Arabia and spoke of the importance of Britain's economic and diplomatic ties with the kingdom, it's now been granted the right to host the 2034 FIFA Men's World Cup. England's Football Association has said today that it has had assurances from Saudi authorities that LGBT England fans will not be arrested while attending the tournament. Mike, you're a sort of football fan. You support Arsenal, don't you?
When I have the time, Ian. Yes.
Are you uncomfortable about this?
I mean, it's putting two and two together, isn't it? And not necessarily coming up with the right answer. That's how I perceive this. Keir Starmer's speaking with international partners regularly on a daily basis, and then there's going to be decisions made the day after or the day after that on many things. It doesn't mean that Keir Starmer's waded in on it. So, that's my view on it. In terms of them holding it an LGBTQ plus safety, that's really important. And there does need to be that modernisation to ensure that there is that safety there, and that is a concern.
Reem?
I would also add that it's not just LGBTQ plus people that are at risk in Saudi Arabia, it's also many other groups, and we know that, for example, racism is incredibly rife in Saudi Arabia. I've got cousins that live there, so I sort of hear first-hand experience of what it's like. I do agree with Mike. I think it's wrong to sort of suggest in any way that Sir Keir Starmer has anything to do with it physically. However, hosting the Saudi royal family with the British royal family absolutely does signal that we are friends, that we are allies, and that it is perfectly okay to hold a football game.
But we are.
Well,
and have been for many, many, many years.
Absolutely. And I think it's absolutely right that we do ensure that people that do travel to Saudi Arabia are going to be safe. I am also of the view that we shouldn't be meddling in other countries' domestic policies. I'm absolutely against the way that they've treated LGBTQ people. I'm against how they've treated women. I think that it's not our business to deal with them, and I think we've got a lot of problems domestically that we need to deal with first.
OK, Will?
Well, I just checked for Arsenal fans. They're 1-0 up against Monaco.
we don't mention that.
But look, I mean, you can't help but agree. I mean, I think that the whole question of money in sport.
Can I just throw something else into this before you go on? Because in opposition, Keir Starmer was very critical of the Saudi regime and said all sorts of things about how he wouldn't do this, he wouldn't do that, wouldn't do the other. And yet, within his first 6 months, he goes to Saudi Arabia. And obviously, I mean, realpolitik is part of being Prime Minister. You have to deal with people that you might not want to. But within 6 months?
I know. I find it, it is tricky. And I'm not entirely certain, because the UAE hosted the kind of World Cup just recently, and to come back to the Middle East and all the problems about playing in 35, 40 degrees centigrade and all the rest of it kind of so quickly, I thought it was a kind of I think the authorities were craven here. You can have Saudi Arabia maybe give it another decade or 2 decades and give them some time also to kind of put in place mild progress towards liberalisation
they are progressing, aren't they? They're making that.
It is true. So I think that it would have been. So the questioner is saying, that actually. The British government should use its kind of influence, such as it has actually, and it's because football is independently managed. It's not a kind of the state doesn't have that much influence.
Well, we'll do soon with the football regulator.
Well, indeed.
Yeah, but that'll be just UK provenance. It won't be international provenance. I do get it, and I do think that. It would have. I think it might have been better to frown rather rather than to kind of gleefully say yes.
Hate to correct you twice, but it was Qatar which hosted the World Cup, not the UAE.
I beg your pardon. I so beg your pardon.
Yes, I mean, this is an
LBC
issue.
Verify here.
The person of Iain Dale.
Joe.
It's not just Saudi Arabia, and obviously Qatar. We've had, Olympics in Beijing and Russia, and I'm not sure that any government is able to influence the human rights policies of host countries. The issue, I suppose, has to be whether there should be a boycott of any country that offends our own sensitivities. And I think, clearly, when it comes to
where do you draw the line, though? I mean, let's say Iran got the next Olympic Games. I mean, that would be quite a ethical issue.
I think if they're actively hostile to the United Kingdom, that's where the line is drawn. And it's Saudi Arabia are actively an ally with the United Kingdom. I think Iran and China and Russia are where I draw the line. Anywhere else, I mean, we'd have to be boycotting the entire world, and that's just not feasible.
We have to be careful to separate politics from sport.
Yes, you are right.
That is really important, because otherwise you get bogged down on a daily basis when you're playing in different countries and taking the joy away from sport.
I mean, interesting. Russia hosted the World Cup only 6 years ago. Would we boycott a Russian-hosted World Cup now? I suspect we might.
We would, yeah.
And I mean, interesting, the Olympics, you had Russians labelled something else, able to take part, and Ukrainians. It is a very complex issue, I think. I'm not sure that you can take the politics out of sport, and it's becoming more and more complex.
OK, we'll move on in just a moment. It's 8:45 on LBC.
This is LBC. Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:46, Mike Tapp, Labour MP for Dover, Joe Gideon, former Conservative MP, Reem, Ibrahim from the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Will Hutton, Observer columnist, for the time being anyway. That was said with humour, Will, as you know. Right, let's go to a text question from James. Is it time for the public sector unions to just grow up and take the 2.8% pay rise the government is offering them? Joe?
So, I think Labour have found it quite interesting and difficult that the public sector are not happy to sort of roll over and have become empowered through above inflation-busting pay rises. The challenge is that it hasn't been that the pay rises that they gave immediately upon coming into office were not linked to productivity, were not linked to any form of reform, and the real challenge for the country is if you go on giving larger pay rises to public sector bodies that the private sector can't keep up, you get inflation, the whole thing collapses, and we still have waiting lists as we had before. We still have challenges with police teaching, so is it time for them to grow up? I think it's time for there to be recognition that we need serious reform within the public sector, and that has to be led by government, and I can't see it happening.
Mike?
So I'd say firstly that the pay rises we presented when we came into government are linked to productivity. Because
no, they're not. The rail union...
So there's millions of people out of work through long-term sickness. So having doctors working will help that. Having the trains moving will also help that. We lost billions of pounds through things like ticket sales, through people not being able to reach the venues. So this is linked to certainly to the economy. But then if you look at...
Every wage is linked to the economy.
Then if you look at the pay body, independent pay bodies' recommendations, what we've done at this moment in time is we've gone back, we've done the maths, and we've said that it looks like it's 2.8% that we can offer. But that's still got to go through review. No decision has been made yet. We've inherited a very difficult fiscal situation, so there can't be massive pay rises across the board, but in the right places.
But there have been so far. I think that's the point. And so naturally, the public sector unions think, well, we'll have a bit of that as well. Thank you very much.
They're not linked to productivity. The thing is, public sector pay has to be put into the context of public sector spending, and we are already spending huge amounts of money in the public sector. 2.8% is actually quite generous. It is above what inflation is predicted to be next year, which is 2.6%. So I think we have to have that conversation. If we want to see higher wages in the public sector, we need to see better productivity. We also need to see more efficiency. And ultimately, I think we need to think about public sector reform. We've mentioned the fact that National Health Service have got a huge waiting list of over 8 million. We've got huge amounts of people that are unable to get back into work. A tenth of the adult working population are on long-term sickness benefits. There is a national scandal in this country, and it's predominantly as a result of the government increasing that spending and effectively bending to the unions every single time they ask for more money. It is unacceptable for those people in the private sector that work incredibly hard. There are huge amounts of people across the British economy
But
that
there are
work
lots of people in the public
hard.
sector who work incredibly hard who haven't had much of a pay rise for a very long time.
That's absolutely true, but we need to have a conversation about productivity. We need to have a conversation about where the money is coming from. We can't keep taxing the productive side of the public sector, so the private sector, to pay for then the public sector. It's not feasible, not sustainable.
Will, I suspect you're not going to agree with Reem on this one.
Where do I start? I mean, first of all, I think the concept of peer review bodies is rather good, and I'm a little concerned, Mike, that actually the government is trying to clip their wings, because the peer review bodies take into account the kind of are invited to take into account the overall fiscal position, as well as looking at questions about retention and hiring, morale, and also productivity. I mean, they're very, and actually the recommendations they make are, pretty considered. And actually to say, well, actually, you can forget all that, guys. You're just going to get, all you can do is offer 2.8%. Seems to me to be an inappropriate position. I would have preferred if that had been a kind of advice that was given to the peer review bodies for them to take into account.
It's really important.
Rather than a directive.
We can't bury our head in the sand at what we've inherited here, so it's important to lay out the position clearly.
The state is unsustainable.
One at a time.
Of course. But, there may be parts of the public sector where actually there's a conversation to be had about performance and about productivity, and actually the peer review body hears it and says, well, I think, given everything into it, we could pay 3.5%, we could pay 4%, or there could maybe ways in which we could kind of organise this so that we can deal with some of the retention and recruitment issues that actually are problematic. And actually, just to say 2.8% as a flat directive, I thought was over the top, actually. That said, and here again, I challenge you, Joe, and the idea that that actually you make a pay settlement when the government first comes in July, and by the first weeks of December there should be a kind of transformation in kind of 100 days. It's kind of ludicrous. It's going to take these things will take time to bed in. And I do think actually, and I was talking to some primary school teachers earlier over the weekend. Some of the things, what's going on in classrooms and the stress and kind of incredible kind of, kids that are mute, kids that kind of are hungry, kids that actually kind of just have profound learning difficulties in the same class as other kids who've got, and you're kind of indifferently paid at the primary school teacher. I just think you've got some awareness of actually how important these parts of the public sector are. A teacher, a nurse, what they face on a daily basis is amazing.
So absolutely nobody is saying that teachers aren't incredible, that people who work in the NHS aren't incredible.
But don't pay them then. Refuse to pay them.
That's a nonsense. But people who work in the private sector are also incredible.
That's true.
Quite often, and they have to be paid according to they have to cut their cloth according to the means. If the money isn't there, then they can't get bonuses. They can't get extra pay. So the idea that you don't value somebody if you can't give them double-digit pay rises. It's just a nonsense.
No one's talking about double-digit pay.
Well, whatever.
Well, some of the unions have been talking about double-digit pay rises. That's the problem. Now, listen, we've got time to fit one more question, and I want to give this a bit of an airing. So, Olive in Leeds says, Sir Elton John has hit out at the legalization of marijuana in Canada and parts of the US, calling it one of the greatest mistakes of all time. Is he right?
No.
Now, well, just a second. He says marijuana is addictive. It leads to other drugs, and that people who have smoked it don't think normally. He got clean from drugs, including marijuana, at the start of the 1990s, and has since helped other performers, including Robbie Williams and Eminem, overcome addictions. Go on then, Reem.
We absolutely should legalise marijuana in this country. I've just come back from Canada about 3 weeks ago, actually, and
I thought you seemed a bit spacey.
well, I had a bit of fun there too. I will neither confirm nor deny if I dabbled.
I think you just did.
Well, what I will say is that I think that these kind of crimes should not. It sort of goes back to our initial question about prisons. Why should it be illegal for somebody to take a drug that we know is not as harmful as other things? Marijuana is definitely less harmful than some legal substances like alcohol, and yet there is significantly
Well, the marijuana
less.
of my youth might have been, but the marijuana of today isn't.
And the reason for that is because it's illegal. If we legalise it, we can regulate it, we can tax it, we can ensure it's being produced by a taxed and regulated private sector rather than by criminal gangs, which is the current system. Just because something is illegal doesn't mean it doesn't end up on the streets.
Okay.
We all know weed is everywhere in this country.
Joe?
By the way, just to say, I agree with
Hang on.
No, it hasn't been the case.
Libertarian.
It hasn't been the case.
Turnwell.
So I'm a bit ambivalent on this. As you say, marijuana in my day was allegedly was quite mild and wasn't as strong. But nowadays, is it skunk?
Did you ever try it?
I didn't. I'm a really boring person.
I didn't
even
either,
try
so
smoking.
we're so similar in so many ways.
I guess I sat in a room where it was wafting through the air, so maybe I
can't even smell it. You see,
I
it's
think you should
prevalent in London. I can't. People say, "Oh, can't you smell it in Leicester Square?" No, I can't.
Well,
I don't know why.
I can definitely smell it.
But the people do say it's the gateway to Class A drugs, and I saw as the MP in Stoke the devastating effect of there was a thing called monkey dust, which is a kind of hallucinogenic, which had crippling effects. Now. I would need to be convinced that it isn't
right. So you're firmly on the fence.
I'm absolutely firmly on the fence. Yeah.
Well, I agree with Ibrahim. I think that that actually.
No, that's her surname. Reem is her.
Another mistake from me.
Three strikes and you're out, Will.
I'll just retire gracefully, actually. But I do think that the point is well made. I mean, that actually, not just marijuana, actually, but kind of all these drugs kind of require to be kind of, inspected, regulated. I mean,
crack.
All of it. I mean, I would
decriminalise it. I wouldn't.
You criminalise. You can some things you criminalise, but actually, what the kids are taking is kind of mad.
But it's produced by criminals. This is the
and
point.
I'm not sure that marijuana is the most serious. Actually, I mean, some of the drugs you take in some of the clubs are really kind of screw you up.
And they are so easily available. I mean, that's the point. Just because it's illegal under the law doesn't mean it doesn't exist in a huge black market.
Okay, Mike.
It's a difficult one. I think on balance, I understand the arguments for legalising, which are predominantly around safety and also cutting out some of the criminal gangs. But a big argument is that it's less harmful than many other drugs. And I think the fact that it's harmful is enough for me to just about fall on the side of not legalising
Should we ban alcohol?
Well, look, if alcohol was discovered now, it probably would not be legal. It'd probably be quite a high-class drug because it can be very damaging. Look at
prohibition in the
Should we ban everything? Should we ban damaging? Should we ban sugar?
We certainly should not ban alcohol. But what I'm saying is I've no doubt if it was discovered now, it would not be quite as liberal as we are around it. So
I'm not sure about that. Wine has been a fabulous thing.
Let's move on to our fun question. Izzy in Bristol says, Lego is apparently the most wanted Christmas toy among kids in Britain this year. But what was your most memorable childhood Christmas present? Reem.
Well, I grew up Muslim, so I got no Christmas presents, except for a lovely bag of sweets by my primary school teacher. So I have no favourite because I only had one.
So you don't celebrate Christmas at all?
No, I mean, I do now. I'm actually this year going to celebrate it with my boyfriend for the first time. Yes, which I'm very excited about. But other than that, I've never celebrated Christmas because I grew up in a Muslim family. Multicultural Britain, there you go.
Mike?
Probably a bike.
Oh.
Chopper.
It was horrible.
A bit too young.
It was lime green. It was I was very excited by that. But I was battling between that and Nintendo. Action Man as well was quite exciting.
Okay, Joe?
So I love ballet, and I had this tiny little ballerina. When you put her in front of a mirror, she did pirouettes. And it was a sort of magnet, but it was really clever.
Okay, Will?
Well, both my grandsons, actually, I've got actually 3 grandsons, but both grandsons wanted a Lego Starship kit. You know, that's kind of a big deal, actually.
It's always my favourite present. I still have my Lego set.
I'm quite struck by the kind of popularity of Lego. I slightly older than the rest of you, used to get Airfix kits, Airfix models, and and they were great. You know, you could build Lancaster bombers, Spitfires. So I kind of the days after Christmas was spent assembling
because that's the thing.
Remnants of the Second World War. That was what I kind of.
The 3 of us grew up in an era when everything was still dominated by the aftermath of the Second World War. And I remember the games that we'd play in the playground at school were all British Bulldog sort of people would run around pretending to be Spitfires, and it was a totally different era, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, on that note of reminiscence, thank you all for joining us for Cross Question today. Monday's panel includes the FBU General Secretary Matt Rack, Labour MP Polly Billington, and the pollster Scarlett Maguire. So do join us for that on Monday from 8. Coming up in the next hour, I learnt a new phrase today, medical misogyny. Never heard of it before. I wonder whether it existed before today, because a committee of MPs have coined this phrase. They say women and girls with reproductive conditions are enduring years of pain because of medical misogyny. Their conditions are frequently dismissed due to pervasive stigma and a lack of education surrounding common conditions, including endometriosis, heavy periods, and adenomyosis. I'm sure I said that wrong. That's according to the Women and Equalities Committee of MPs. If you're a woman, have you encountered what is called medical misogyny? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the father and stepmother of 10-year-old Sarah Sharif have been found guilty of her murder at her Surrey home. Jurors heard she suffered years of abuse and had worn a hijab to school to cover up injuries. 42-year-old Irfan Sharif, 30-year-old Binash Batul and her uncle Faisal Malik, who's 29, fled to Pakistan after her body was found in Woking in August last year. Libby Clark from the Crown Prosecution Service says it was clear immediately Sarah's father did not act alone.
The fact was that the infliction of some of those injuries would have needed the participation and encouragement of the other people, the other adults within the house.
Victims of the post office scandal will have to wait until 2027 to get justice, according to police. Authorities want to wait until the public inquiry is over before bringing potential criminal charges. But they do say they are investigating dozens of people and their possible